denizens of the night. Welcome to another episode of the macabre, the terrifying. Broadcasting live from a winding trail not on any map, I will be your guide through the witching hours. Tonight, we'll begin a 3-part series. How exciting! Our protagonist is fresh off of a hiker's high that caused them to reevaluate their romantic relationship and also to develop a passion for the outdoors. As this passion deepens, they become aware of a hard-to-find trail called the Whisper Tree Trail. But rumors swirl about this trail and the mysterious wish-granting tree at its summit. This story is called The Whisper Tree Trail and was written by Kris West. The Whisper Tree. This one isn't easy to find. The hike up the mountain is strenuous and is for only the most experienced of hikers. Do not attempt if you are not physically fit for an exhausting trek or are weak of spirit. Once you've climbed the north face for about 40 minutes, you'll see what's known as the St. Christopher's Cross, 2 pines that have grown in such a way that it forms a cross. To the right of the cross is the path to the summit, and it will not lead you to the Whisper Tree. To the left of the cross, about 50 yards, you'll find a small game trail leading you to Face-In Rock. You'll know you are there when you see a pair of eyes staring back at you. Once you get to the rock, you will be confronted with 3 possible scenarios. There could be a trail to the left of the rock, to the right of the rock, or no trail on either side. If the trail is open on the left, it will take you around the bend, and you will hook back up with the summit trail. If there is no trail, climb back down the mountain and try again on another day. If the trail is open on the right side of the rock, follow it for 50 yards. You'll hear the tree before you see it. Snatches of conversation can be heard all around you. You'll arrive at a small clearing encircled by ancient stones. In the middle of the circle is the Whisper Tree. You may approach it and ask a question. You will hear a response whispered into your ears that may or may not be distressing. We do not advise asking the tree anything. Higgins' Hiking Guide, published in 1912. The Higgins Hiking Guide has been published every year since 1912. It is the gold standard for guidebooks. However, the 1912 edition is the only version that contains any documentation about the Whisper Tree Trail. It's become a myth in the hiking community. Most people believe the story is nothing more than a fraud created to help sell guidebooks. A smaller community believes the legend to be true. Me? I just wanted a new adventure. I didn't hike as a kid or a teenager. I didn't see the point in walking up a hill for no other reason than saying I had done it. As with most adolescent thoughts, it was misguided. In my early 20s, I started seeing Joe, an avid outdoorsman who would not shut up about hiking. He dragged me on a bunch of different camping trips. While I found myself warming to the idea of this kind of stuff being fun, I didn't really understand him until we went on a mountain hike. From the outset, I didn't know what to expect from this journey, other than I would be tired during and my legs would be sore after. Both things were true, but something else happened on the side of that mountain. An awakening. It was as if a bolt from the sky came down and struck directly into my cerebral cortex. Suddenly,
The universe and Mother Nature made sense to me in ways I'd never considered. Maybe it was the lower oxygen levels, but it got to me. I remember being at the summit and staring at the valley floors below me in wonder. At that height, the world was an abstract painting in green, brown, blue, and yellow hues. The more I focused on the whole picture, the more transcendent the art became. To belong to this beauty seemed impossible, yet I was on the canvas too. From the mountain's peak, the winds cut through me like a scorned lover's lies. It helped break the spell and made me realize the reality of the situation. I had done it. I climbed a mountain. But unlike Joe, I didn't feel like a conqueror seizing a treasure. I felt like a pilgrim making an offering. I'm here. Take me as I am. I remember thinking the only things higher than I was at that moment were birds and gods. I was moved to tears. On the descent, Joe tried to talk to me about what I was feeling, but the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to keep it just for me. I didn't feel the need to share my mountain epiphany with anyone but Mother Nature. As I stared down at her beauty, we became connected. Just us two. Maybe it sounds a bit granola for some of you, but hopefully you'll find your missing piece one day. When you do, trust me, it'll make sense. From the summit, I saw everything the outdoors had to offer. But I also saw the boundless potential for love inside my soul. Just not for Joe. Truth be told, Joe and I were on the rocks while on the hike, both figuratively and literally. I didn't know if he was still someone I wanted to confess my emotional awakening to. He tried to get it out of me, though, the entire 5 hours down the mountain. I even told him that I didn't feel like discussing it, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He saw that something had happened to me up there, and he wanted to know what it was. Secretly, I think he needed to take credit for it. I wasn't going to let him have that. The car ride home was not pleasant. I was adamant I didn't want to discuss anything. I was annoyed with his behavior, and so physically and emotionally raw from the hike that I didn't care to listen to Joe's ramblings. I told him several times to just stop, but he didn't. He said he felt that he needed to know all my thoughts and feelings to better support me. People in relationships don't have secrets, he told me. At that point, we had dated for 2 months. This time in my life was chaotic. I felt unmoored and adrift in my personal and professional lives. Work was a slog, and home life wasn't much better. I knew my days with Joe were waning, and this trip had clinched it. It was odd to be trapped between two extreme poles, my heart being unshackled by the majesty of Mother Nature, while simultaneously being shackled by the chains of a failing relationship. At a certain point, I stopped responding to Joe's rantings, and the rest of the drive home was silent. I gave him the cold shoulder, and we didn't talk for several days. Then he started showing up at my job. I ducked him 2 or 3 times, but it became clear this wasn't going to end. I didn't want to make a scene at work, so I reached out and set a day and time to talk. When Joe and I finally had a face-to-face chat, in a public setting because I wouldn't feel safe otherwise, I ripped the Band-Aid off. I let him down gently, which I felt at the time was better than he deserved. He was so clingy, and his actions honestly scared me. He seemed a little taken aback at first, but the more we spoke, the more apparent it became. He couldn't save this. "Was it because of the hiking trip?" he asked. "That was the final straw," I said, as softly as possible. "But we were heading down this path for a while, Joe." "I never felt that," he admitted. "But I did. And the fact that you never even noticed is another reason. We're two people, Joe. I have feelings and thoughts separate from you. I'm allowed that, whether in a relationship or not." "But we're good together," he said, his voice dipping into sadness. "I have real feelings for you." "I don't," I said, plunging the dagger all the way in. I stood and left him there in the booth, all alone. I didn't feel bad. He had revealed his true self, and I was confident enough to walk away. I didn't look back at him and didn't shed a tear. I believe that things happen for a reason, and people enter and exit our lives when we need them. I'm forever grateful to Joe for guiding me to my passion, but that would be it. While that relationship didn't last, my love for hiking did. I spent a small fortune getting decent secondhand gear from various stores. I found a beginners hiking group that met every weekend for a hike in a new location. I enjoyed my time with the group, but often wished I was alone on those hikes. When you solo hike, you can contemplate any number of things in the buzzing silence of nature. I know that sounds contradictory, but it's really not. There's a stillness and quietness in nature that isn't defined by a lack of sounds. It's a great unburdening of the daily noise your brain whips up. Once that fog lifts, you can get clarity like you've never had before. I found myself craving that clarity more and more. Soon I outgrew the group and started hiking after work. My skills got better and better. I joined a survivalist class and learned various tricks for surviving off the land. I started off-the-grid camping, where I would hike to a remote place and sleep under the stars. My vacations became all about hiking famous trails all across the country. Hiking was a drug, and I was hooked. If you're a junkie like me, you go everywhere for your next fix. I soon started haunting every online hiking forum I could find. I gleaned so much new information and insight into all aspects of the hobby. One of the best things was the location of secret trails that experienced hikers passed around like coins of the realm. You had to prove your bona fides before they'd give you anything, but once you did, you were awash in new experiences. That's when I first heard about the Whisper Tree. I had a Higgins guide, every respectable hiker does. But as I became more of an avid hiker, I became interested in collecting older versions of the book. You can actually see climate change happen across the pages. Trails that used to be viable disappear over time. Places you used to be able to travel to are now restricted. That waterfall that you could shower in, it's a trickle now. But among hikers and collectors, the crown jewel was a copy of the 1912 Higgins Guide. Besides being the first one published, it was the only one that contained the only known passage to the Whisper Tree Trail. Most hikers don't think it's a real place, while others claim they've been there and seen the tree. No one ever has actual proof, and in the age of cell phones, that seems insane. It probably wasn't real, but the idea that it could be real inflamed the romantic adventurer in me. I needed to see for myself and make a decision. Firstly, though, I needed to get a copy of the book. There's a subculture around finding copies of the 1912 hiking guide itself. and most of those people have failed at every attempt. It's not an easy book to track down. Most of these bookhounds only follow one path: connections within the hiking community. It's a smart play, but that community is small and people talk. Piss off the wrong person, and your odds of getting your hot little hands on a copy disappear like cotton candy in water. To make matters worse, the publisher of the guide acts swiftly and overpays for any old copy that hits the market. You either have to know someone who has a copy or overbid the publisher, which is impossible because they have deep pockets. No one knows why the Higgins people want to collect all those first editions. They've mentioned that they want to save these copies to preserve them, but many in the community don't buy this excuse. If you wanted to put on a tinfoil hat, you'd think they'd want to hide any mention of the Whisper Tree Trail. I decided to go outside the hiking world. Remember, in this era of American history, mail-order catalogs were king. The transportation revolution opened up the country, and people in the interior of the country could get the latest books. The West was home to millions of acres of wild land and a pioneer spirit to explore and record it. A guidebook to the wilderness would have been valuable as any gear. Through work, I connected with independent book collectors and started making calls. I didn't have high hopes, but it was worth a shot. To my surprise, I heard back from someone that had a lead. They knew a guy outside Oklahoma City that claimed to have a copy. They gave me his information, and we started communicating. The man who owned the book wouldn't sell it, but he'd let me see it. I bought a plane ticket that night. A day later, I was sitting in the home office of an octogenarian named Ralph. Ralph was in rough shape, and I was surprised he agreed to see me. He was hunched over like an overfilled sack and moved as fast as an arthritic tortoise. He dragged a small oxygen bottle behind him on a rickety cart that squeaked as he hauled it around. He wheezed in breaths like a drunk sucking the last drop of beer from a bottle. I thought he might die right then and there, but his heart kept ticking. His office was as ancient as he was. The walls were lined with bookshelves crammed with old leather-bound tomes. That aroma, coupled with the baked-in cigarette smell, gave the room the familiar odor of the past. I couldn't imagine how stained the walls were in the room from the years of burning Carolina tobacco. The non-bookshelf walls were mainly bare, save for a framed Polaroid of a woman and a young boy. Like everything else in here, it had yellowed with time and smoke. I imagined this was his family, but I didn't press. "Surprised I've had as many visitors as I've had lately," he said. "Am I not the first?" "In about a month, yeah. Before that, there were a few others." "What do you tell them?" I asked. "To avoid the trail." Behind his desk was an enclosed glass case filled with a few well-worn first editions. These were his prized pieces, and he wouldn't let the environment ruin them. He waddled over to the case and pulled out his keys. His hands shook as he tried to open the lock. "You a hiker, huh?" he asked over his shoulder. His voice was phlegmy and rough around the edges, with a slight southern lilt. "I am," I said, speaking louder than I usually would. "You have the body of one," he said, unaware that he probably shouldn't be sharing those opinions with someone he had just met. "I try to stay in shape," I said with a laugh. "Hiking is the best way to do it. I've told so many people to try it, but most of the time it falls on deaf ears." "It's a big investment," I said. "Bah," he said, waving his tremulous hands at me. Just need to go outside and find nature. Cheapest thing there is. I didn't feel like going into the amount of gear serious modern hikers bring with them. I didn't think upsetting a man that was going to give me a peek at my personal holy grail was a good move. When was the last time you hiked? He stopped fumbling with the keys for a second and stared into the middle distance. It's been a long time. Long time. Can't rightly do it with the tank dragging behind me. I suppose that would make things a bit more difficult. Everything is when you're my age, he said, nodding at the keys. Sorry this is taking so long. Do you need a hand, or? I offered. No, I can get it. As if on cue, the key ring fell from his hand and landed with a metallic clang. He uttered a swear under his breath and tried to bend down to retrieve them. I stood up to help, but he waved me away again. I can do it, he said, bending down. If you need help, I'm here. Thank you, he said. Eventually, he grabbed those keys off the ground and slowly straightened back up. His hands were shaking to the point where the keys were jingling. If I didn't know any better, it was like he was trying to distract me with them. How did you get a hold of a first edition? The Higgins people seem to snatch them all up. I don't advertise it, he said, but people often find me. I assume it's only a matter of time before the Higgins people find me too. I won't sell, though. I don't like what they're doing, to be honest. The past is full of mistakes. No need to hide that fact from people. History should be a mirror where you see the full reflection, warts and all. So you think they're buying all these books up to cover up about the Whisper Tree? I asked, finally broaching the subject we had both danced around. He sighed. Legally, they can't be held responsible if no publicly official guide exists in the free market. If people get information from the internet, well, that's not on the Higgins people. But if a person finds it in one of their books and gets hurt... He trailed off. Do people get hurt? Sometimes, he said, finally slotting the key into the lock and opening the case. There we go. You could smell the inviting scent of old books wafting out of the case and cutting through the smoke. It was an invigorating rush, and I was so excited to finally see the passage in person. Ralph gingerly picked up the old guidebook and placed it on his desk. It was so old and delicate that it looked like a stiff breeze would turn it to dust. Now, Ralph said, turning to me. You can't take it. I'll show you the passage. If you want, you can copy it on paper. No photos. Understood? Understood, I said, with childlike glee. I appreciate you even letting me see this. I got up and crossed to the desk. Ralph had laid out a pair of white gloves so I wouldn't damage the pages when I turned them. I sat down and put on the gloves. I was about to crack the spine when he stopped me. Are you sure you want to see this? To copy these words? To do this hike? Yes, I said instantly. Why else would I be here? I figured, but I thought I'd ask. You wouldn't look? No, I would've, and did, he said. I went to the trail. I saw the tree. Oh my God, I said. What was it like? It's different for everyone, he said. Did you hear the whispers? He nodded. My jaw dropped. What did they say? Lots of things. Some of it pretty, most not. Did you ask the tree a question? He paused. He took a deep breath, and I could hear the strain it took for him to do so.
I did, but I wished I hadn't.
Why?
Nothing good came from it,
he said, shaking his head at the bad memories.
Nothing.
I wanted to press, but when I looked up at Ralph, he glanced over at the framed Polaroid. There were tears in his eyes. I decided to skip it and turned my attention back to the book. If I had the time, I would have spent all day looking at this one and comparing it to the newest guide, but I had a flight to catch this evening. I had time for one thing: the directions to the Whisper Tree. I opened the table of contents and found what I was looking for. I carefully flipped the pages until my eyes caught a glimpse of the passage I had traveled to see. The Whisper Tree. It was real. I could barely contain my excitement. "Oh my God," I said softly.
God doesn't have anything to do with it,
Ralph wheezed, and then started violently coughing. I asked if he was okay, but he waved me off again. I turned back to the page and scribbled down the passage precisely as written. I still couldn't believe I was here and doing this. I couldn't believe the trail was real. If the trail was real, the tree had to be real too. Is it magic or...
Don't know.
How does it hide?
Don't know.
Who planted it?
No clue,
he said.
Nobody has those answers. It's there because it's there. When it's not there, it's not there.
But how does that happen? I pressed. Time distortion? Overlapping parallel universes? A witch's curse? A genetic mutation of the tree's seed?
All I know,
he said, struggling to catch his breath,
is that the Higgins Guide wrote about the trail in 1912. But people in that area had known about it for longer than that. Rumor has it, native folks thought it was divine way before the white man appeared.
I was struck by that. We often forget how old trees really are. Some current trees that provide shade and give us air to breathe first broke through the soil when the calendars went from BC to AD. Was this tree one of those? Was it even of this earth?
Details, he added, are far and few.
How many people have visited the tree? I asked.
Who knows? I know a handful of people who have been, but there are dozens of old guidebooks still out there.
What's it like, the tree? I asked.
Looks like a Table Mountain pine.
Is it big?
Not like you'd expect.
Does it really not show up for some people?
Yep,
he said with a shrug.
It was there the time I went. Wasn't when my friend Bill went. The first time, anyway.
Did he go a second time?
Oh, yeah,
he said.
He saw it and asked a question.
What happened?
He died a month later. Car accident.
Oh my God, I said, stunned.
Drunk driver veered into the lane and hit him square on. Dead on impact.
I'm sorry, I said.
That's life, he said,
adding,
I told him to not ask anything, but he did anyway. Was stubborn as an old mule, Bill was.
Do you think the tree had anything to do with it? Ralph waited and collected his thoughts.
I don't think the tree caused the accident, no.
That's good, right?
I do think the tree put its branches on the scales, though, he said, answering my question. Something changed in Bill after that trip. It's hard to explain, but it was a gut feeling. Things were just different.
What happened when you went to the tree?
I had a life of regret,
he said, and shut down. I knew that it was in my best interest to drop the conversation. Whatever happened to Ralph wasn't for me to know. I was okay with that. I skimmed the book for another hour or so before I had to go. I thanked Ralph profusely for his hospitality. After he put the book away and relocked the case, he escorted me to the front door, his little cart squeaking behind us like an annoying dog. As I was about to leave, he touched my shoulder. I turned to him and stared into his eyes. There was a touch of sadness there that I hadn't seen before. Those eyes had seen a lot over the years, maybe too much. "Thank you for letting me read the book," I said.
"You're welcome,"
he said with a slight nod. He looked like he wanted to say something else but was holding back. I felt his grip on my shoulder tighten. He took a deep breath, and you could hear the oxygen from the bottle entering his nose through the tubes in his nostrils. "Is there—"
"Sometimes,"
he started.
"Sometimes there's no heartache when you see the tree. Something good might even come from the trip. But whatever makes the decision, call it fate or magic or whatever, when it marks against you, it cuts deep."
"Oh," I said.
"It can cost you dearly. It isn't worth the hassle."
"That only happens if you ask a question, though, right? If I just make the hike to see it, I'll be okay." He shrugged.
"Maybe, maybe not. But why risk it? You're young. Your whole life is ahead of you. You don't want the burden I carry. I've carried it for years, and it's never gotten lighter. Not for 1 second."
Tears filled his eyes again. He let them fall. I didn't know what to say. This whole exchange had caught me off guard. He nodded at me and gave me a weak smile.
"If I said I had a bad feeling about your hike, would it make a difference?"
I looked away, ashamed. I didn't have to vocalize an answer. Ralph knew I wouldn't be swayed.
"If you'd consider listening to a broken old man," he said, struggling to catch his breath, "I hope you don't do the hike."
"I know," was all I could think to say.
What a delicious tease! I'm left wanting more, left wondering if the whisper tree is something of a monkey's paw. The tree sounds almost otherworldly, doesn't it? Ancient, inscrutable, somewhat neutral, but more malevolent than not. Imagine stumbling upon a plant of any kind that spoke to you. I mean literally, not metaphorically. I can't wait to find out what question our protagonist will ask, and what the fallout will be from it. If you've enjoyed Kris's writing, please help me support him by checking out his book, I've Never Told Anyone. It's a collection of short stories that is just perfect to read as the days grow shorter. I'll put up a link to another story we've done together, The Tomorrow Quilt. As always, your comments, subs, and likes are all breath in my lungs. You drive me ever onward to the next gripping tale. Whatever you do, don't go down the left-hand path. And don't fall asleep.